for a moment this idea of dependence at the level of everyday living. In this area, it is starting to discover how dependent we really are and how unconscious of that dependence. Every modern house has electric wiring carrying power and light to its interior. We are delighted with this dependence. Our main hope is that nothing will ever cut off the supply of the current. So by accepting our dependence on this marvel of science, we find ourselves more independent personally. Not only are we more independent, we are even more comfortable and secure. Power flows just where it is needed, silently and surely. Electricity, that strange energy so few people understand, meets our simplest daily needs, and our most desperate ones too. Ask the polio sufferer confined to an iron lung who depends with complete trust upon a motor to keep the breath of life in him. But the moment our mental or emotional dependence is in question, how differently we behave, how persistently we claim the right to decide all by ourselves just what we shall think and just how we shall act. Oh yes, we'll weigh the pros and the cons of every problem. We'll listen politely to those who would advise us, but all the decisions are to be ours alone. Nobody is going to meddle with our personal independence in such matters. Besides, we think there is no one we can surely trust. We are certain that our intelligence backed by willpower can rightly control our inner lives and guarantee us success in the world we live in. This is a brave philosophy wherein each man plays God. Sounds good in the speaking, but it still has to meet the acid test. How well does it actually work? One good look in the mirror ought to answer enough for any alcoholic. I like that. Should his own image in the mirror be too awful to contemplate, and it usually is, he might first take a look at the results of normal people are getting from self-sufficiency. Everywhere he sees people filled with anger and fear, society breaking up into warring fragments. Each fragment says to the other, we are right and you are wrong. Every such pressure group, if it is strong enough, self-righteously imposes its will upon the rest. And everywhere the same thing is being done on an individual basis. The sum of all this mighty effort is less peace and less brotherhood than before. The philosophy of self-sufficiency is not paying off. Plainly enough, it is a bone-crushing juggernaut whose final achievement is ruin. And therefore, we who are alcoholics can consider ourselves fortunate indeed. Each of us have had his own natural fatal encounter with the juggernaut of self-will and has suffered enough under its weight to be willing to look for something better. So it is by circumstance rather than by any virtue that we have been driven to AA, have admitted defeat, have acquired the rudiments of faith, and now want to make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to that higher power. We realize that the word dependence is distasteful, and many psychiatrists and psychologists as it is to alcoholics. Like our professional friends, we too are aware that they are wrong from this. They are wrong forms of dependence. We have experienced many of them. No adult, man or woman, for example, should be in too much emotional dependence upon... No adult, man or woman, for example, should be in too much emotional dependence upon parent. They should have been weaning long before, and if they have not been, they should wake up to that fact. This very form of faulty dependence has caused many rebellious alcoholics to conclude that dependence of any sort must be intolerably damaging. But dependence upon AA group or a higher power hasn't produced any baleful results. When World War II broke out, this spiritual principle had its first major test. AAs entered the services and were scattered all over the world. Would they be able to take discipline, stand up under fire, and endure the monotony and misery of war? Would the kind of dependence they had learned in AA carry them through? Well, it did. They had even fewer alcoholic lapses or emotional binges than AA Safe at Home did. They were just as capable of endurance and valor as any other soldiers. Whether it was in Alaska or the Salerno beachhead, their dependence upon higher power worked. And far from being weakness, this dependence was their chief source of strength. So how exactly can the willing person continue to turn his will and his life over to the higher power? He made a beginning, we have seen. When he commenced to rely upon AA for the solution for his alcohol problem, by now, though, the chances are that he has become convinced that he has more problems than alcohol, and that some of these refuse to be solved by the all sheer personal determination and courage he can muster. They simply will not budge. They make him desperately unhappy and threaten his newfound sobriety. Our friend is still victimized by remorse and guilt when he thinks of yesterday. Bitterness still overpowers him when he broods up those he still envies or hates. His financial insecurity worries him sick, and panic takes over when he thinks of all the bridges to safety that alcohol burned behind him. And how shall we ever straighten out that awful jam that cost him the affection of his family and separated him from them? His lone courage and unaided will cannot do it. Surely he must now depend upon somebody or something else. At first, somebody is likely to be his closest AA friend. He relies upon the assurance that his many troubles, now made more acute because he cannot use alcohol to kill the pain, can be solved too. Of course, the sponsor points out that our friend's life is still unmanageable, even though he is sober. That, after all, only a bare start on AA's program has been made. More sobriety brought on by about the admission of alcoholism and the attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed, but it is bound to be far cry from permanent sobriety and contented, useful life. That is just where the remaining steps of the AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring about the much desired result. Then it is explained that other steps of AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. This statement may surprise newcomers who have experienced nothing but constant deflation and a growing conviction that human will is of no value whatever. They have become persuaded, and rightly so, that many problems beside alcohol will not yield to a headlong assault powered by an individual alone. But now it appears that there are certain things which only the individual can do, all by himself, and in the light of his own circumstances. He needs to develop the quality of willingness. When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make a decision to exert himself, trying to do this act on his own will. All of the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles, and so, we trust, to God's will. It is when we try to make our will conform with God's that we begin to use it rightly. To all of us, this was most wonderful revelation. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps, and step 3 opens the door. Once we have come into agreement with these ideals, it is really easy to begin the practice of step 3. In all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, we can pause, ask for quiet, and in stillness simply say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. Wow, that was good. I haven't read that in a little while. Yeah. So I come into Alcoholics Anonymous about, I just had my 5th birthday on the 22nd of March. So I'm 5 years old and a week and a half. And thanks, man. Appreciate it. When I got here, I was really, really broken. I was really beaten. I like to say my spirit and my ego were both beaten into a state of reasonableness at the same time. And I was, as desperate and willing as the dying can possibly be to do whatever it took. And I didn't really come here to learn all this shit in the big book. I came here because I was sick and tired of feeling the way I did, and I had died once in my bedroom where my wife and I reside, and my life flashed before my eyes that night, and then I still used after that for another year and a half. And I know I was powerless and my life was totally unmanageable, and I'd burnt my life right to the ground. I lost my house and lost my business and lost my wife and my kids, and I was pretty willing to do whatever it took. And like I said, I didn't come here for anything other than to maybe get happy again, or maybe get my business rolling again in a different way. But what I found when I found my sponsor is I found a solution to my life. I was born seemingly without a peace, and through the work that I've done and through understanding the literature, I found that missing piece that was always missing. And I had tried some churches a couple years before I actually made it to AA, and I didn't dig the churches. Just something wasn't right. But the thing was I hated church, but for some reason I went to church. So I know God within me was trying to guide me somewhere. And then I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and after a month or month and a half in here, I realized this is what I've been looking for. This is my church. And I haven't looked back. So, I had a lot of anger. I worked out in lust a lot. I had a lot of contentment. I judged everything. And I was a pretty angry guy, man. I was a really angry, very angry man. But with my willingness, like the book says, to try to turn my life over to God, and I didn't understand what that was, but I have a pretty good idea of what it is today, based on the work that I've done. I've written out a list here that would never have been a list that I would have written 5 years ago. If I would have wrote this list 5 years ago, it would have said, God, give me my money back, give me my family back, give me my business back, give me my everything from outside of me back. And as you'll hear from the list today, none of these things come from outside of me, and I just realized that right now. Everything on my list is actually coming from inside me, and I can give it away now. And before, I was always trying to fill that hole on the inside with everything on the outside, and I always wondered why I still felt the way I felt. I know it was God's plan for me to come here and do this work and find out who I truly was. And, I like to say that this meeting tonight is more of a Design for Living meeting. And of course, we'll focus on the substance if you need to focus on the substance, because that is one of the problems we come here with. But the real problem is learning how to live and learning what turning our will and our lives over is. So I'm going to read this, and then I'll open the floor to anyone with questions or comments or whatever. Okay, and we'll just kind of go with the flow and see what's going on. And I can see everybody, so if anyone is waving or putting their little hand up from the thing, I can see everything. Okay. What is God's will for me was my title. And my writing's a little messy, so bear with me. God's will for me is to do what is in front of me right now. That comes straight out of Acceptance is the Answer chapter. God's will for me is to stand strong in the face of fear, look into the fear, and ask why it is here. God's will for me is to go deep into the darkness of that fear, expose the truth of the fear or falseness of that fear, and bring the light of God to the darkness. God's will for me is to love my children and to be a pillar of strength in their lives through my own strength in God. And to me, God is love. God's will for me is to pause when agitated, step back and breathe, respond in love and kindness, or at minimum, don't respond at all. God's will for me is to try to love all of God's kids, and if I don't like all of God's kids, it's my obligation to try to love them anyway. God's will for me is to let the people close to me in my life know that they are loved with no conditions. God's will for me is to pray for strength and direction. God's will for me is to not act in anger, but to act in compassion. God's will for me is to not act in judgment, but in action and understanding. God's will for me is to not act from fear, but to act in faith. God's will for me is to stay sober and help other addicts and alcoholics. God's will for me is to stay sober and help everyone that I come in contact with. God's will for me is to smile and help other people smile. God's will for me is to bring hope to others. God's will for me is to laugh as often as I can and make other people laugh. God's will for me is to make others laugh as often as I can. God's will for me is to learn lessons in everything. God's will for me is to accept that everything happens at any time at exactly the way it is supposed to happen. Yeah, so that's God's will for me today. And that wouldn't have been God's will for me when I was running the show. My experience with Alcoholics Anonymous is prayer. Prayer is the headline. It gets all the attention in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it is one of the primary means of contact with God. But to give it all of the accolades and not give anything else accolades, in my opinion, is totally dead wrong. Prayer with intent is very strong. Prayer without intent is not so strong. But to me, it doesn't matter whether prayer with intent or with intent. It's a matter of prayer for sure, no matter what. But what I want to highlight here is step 11 on page 98 in the 12 and 12. It gives us a pretty insightful view of what Bill actually wants out of prayer. Okay? So I'm gonna read this. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. Prayer and meditation are a principal means of conscious contact with God. Those of us who have come to make regular use of prayer, bottom paragraph on page 97, would no more do without it than we would refuse air, food, or sunshine. And for the same reason, when we refuse air, light, or food, the body suffers. And when we turn away from meditation and prayer, we likewise deprive our minds, our emotions, and our intuitions of vitally needed support. As the body can fail its purpose for lack of nourishment, so can the soul. We all need the light of God's reality, the nourishment of His strength, and the atmosphere of His grace. To an amazing extent, the facts of AA life confirm this ageless truth. And this next paragraph is kind of what I'm talking about. This is really what I wanted to focus on. There is a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit. But when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. So what Bill's saying there is I can do prayer, I can do meditation, and I can do self-examination separately, and I will get much relief and benefit. And think about when you just do prayer and you have a problem and you just say prayer. A lot of times you get relief from whatever it is that's plaguing you, but oftentimes you got to go back to prayer and you're continually praying for whatever it is. And then think about the inventory process, because when we do inventories, the feeling we get about doing the inventories is good. I can see something that I need to work on, and then I get some relief out of that. But that's all I'm getting. And meditation, same kind of thing. It takes a while to kind of get good at meditation, but I won't go into the meditation part too much. But the way Bill writes the literature, and if you know his literature writing all through the big book, he almost always mentions self-examination first. Okay? Self-searching, self-examination is always first in the way that he writes. And here it's no different. There is a direct linkage among self-examination. It's first. Meditation and prayer. Taken separately, these practices bring much relief and benefit. As an alcoholic addict, I'm fucking sick of benefit and relief. I've been a relief seeker my whole life, and I'm sick of relief. If that's all I'm going to get, then fucking give me a drink. But when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. Now and then we may be granted a glimpse into the ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom, and we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure so long as we try, however faultingly, to do the will of our own Creator. And through the process of what that actually says, I'm going to go a little bit deeper because I try to practice this. And when I first self-examination, and I got to find out what it is. And sometimes I can talk with my mind and I can write with my mind whatever it is on paper. And then I take this defect or this issue that I have and I take it to prayer. And I take it to meditation and I ask God to help me remove it. Or I ask God to help me do the opposite of whatever I'm struggling with. So I'm struggling with fear. I ask God to allow me to have faith. I struggle with lust. I ask God to help me, treat women with respect and whatever the opposite is. But what I've learned recently in the last year is every single thing that I feel is energy and I can feel it in my body. So, for example, about 2 weeks ago, I had this feeling and it was really bugging me. And then my meditation guru who I was sitting with, he's like, okay, I want you to stop and I want you to feel the feeling and what is it and where is it? And he said, point to your body where the feeling is. And then I pointed to my chest, like just below below my rib cage, and that's where it was sitting. And then I pulled over my truck and he talked me through it and he's like, I want you to focus on that. Just close your eyes, get into your head. And he said, focus on that. And he said, welcome it. Talk to it. Ask it why it's there. And say you're welcome here and you're to be comfortable here because it's a part of you, and welcome it. He says, because if you resist it, what you resist will always persist. So I got to welcome that thing. And I already knew what I was going to tell him that the feeling was. And I was going to tell him it was about social judgment. And I had a fear of doing something and being judged by social judgment. But then when I went inside and I started talking to that energy ball and asking it and welcoming it, and I said, you can go anywhere in my body you want. I felt the fucking ball of energy just go all through me. And then the anxiety that I felt went away. And then what I realized through the introspection of the meditation portion of this prayer and self-examination was that it wasn't social judgment that was all. It was fear of the unknown because I'm taking some steps into the unknown, and it was actually deep fear of the unknown. But after I did that process, I accepted it and I honored it and it went away and I moved on with my day. So to me, that is what he says when he says, now and then we may be granted a glimpse of the ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom. And that's a place where everything's okay when you get deep within yourself and you get in touch with who you really are. So, that's what I got for that. So the first time through the steps, so hopefully I'm going to answer your question. So the first time through the steps, the whole process is basically, in my opinion, everything that I'm saying tonight is my opinion based on what I've experienced and what I've experienced through working with others. So my opinion, my first time through the steps, I actually don't know what the fuck is going on, right? But I come here with a terrible drug and alcohol habit. I look around and I see you guys are all doing okay and there's a lot of happiness. And I'm kind of convinced that something here is working. So I'm just going to go through the steps. I don't have a clue what step 3 means. And then I get through the steps. And to whatever degree I understand step 10, yeah, you can maybe do that when you're new. Because, you're going to, whatever your version of is that's fine. Step 11, sure, why not do prayer and meditation when you're new? And step 12, as long as you're not helping newcomers, sponsoring them, you can be of service at the guidance of a sponsor, right? And it's only to get sober. Really, it's only to get sober. But the whole AA program, like this reading says, Like all remaining steps, step 3 calls for affirmative action. For it is only by action that we can cut away the self-will, which has always blocked the entry of God. And when you understand the word decision, which is a Latin word, means scissore, it means cut. So cut away the options. So the options are my self-will, and now I make this decision, this scissore, to turn it over to this thing that I don't even understand. Or if you like, a higher power into our lives. Faith, to be sure, is necessary, but faith alone can avail nothing. So this idea that I can just pray and have this faith, actually in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, in my opinion, avails nothing. And there's a line later in the book, in the big book, in Working with Others, it says faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, to give life is what vital means, of giving of life. So faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, it must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. And we'll get into that in a minute. But to be sure, but faith alone can avail nothing. We can have faith yet keep God out of our lives, because it's childish faith and we're still running the show. Therefore, our problem now becomes just how and by what specific means shall we be able to let Him in. Step 3, when I first take this, represents my first attempt to do this. It's my first attempt to even understand what this actually means at all. And I don't have a clue of what this actually means until my step 4 is done, because my will gets highlighted and amplified in step 4. In fact, the effectiveness of the whole AA program will rest upon how well and earnestly we have tried to come to the decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. So basically, after you've done your first set of steps and you get back into this literature, everything else is about trying to understand what's God's will for me. And so step 3 changes a lot, and it becomes kind of the focal point. But like this said, it's only the opening of a door. It's just opening of the door. Step 7 is actually the commencement of God's will in my life. Step 3 is the opening of the door. But for all intents and purposes, let's just say step 3 and step 7 are the same thing. Everything in this program, in the Design for Living, is designed to get me to turn my will and my life over. Every single step can be seen as a case of direction to get me to turn my will and my life over. Where this actually happens, though, is in step 10. Steps 6 and 7, to me, I learn what God's will is through a lot of pain and suffering in step 6. And I've surrendered to God's will in step 7, but it's only worked in step 10. When I'm first new, step 10 is so important and it's so painful. As long as I'm willing to do it, there's a lot of pain. And I start learning through pain and humiliation how to change. And after I've done that long enough and hard enough and consistent enough, I start seeing that actually my way doesn't work and God's will is the way. And the results of step 10 will always produce God's will if I'm following the mechanics of what step 10 is. The problem with step 10 is it gets misconstrued as a step where I make amends quickly. But it's not. It's nothing of the amends. You don't have to make amends if you're following the actual step 10 process in its entirety. And when I'm living in step 11 and 12, I'm going to say step 11 is I sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry out step 6, where I learn God's will, and step 7, where I'm in God's will. And when you look at the step 7 prayer, and you dissect the step 3 and step 7 prayer, they're way different. The step 7 prayer says, I am now willing, which means I am willing to work for you, God, that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I now pray and ask that you remove every single defect of character. The defects of character in step 6 that make me of use to you. Grant me strength as I go from here to do your bidding. And when you look up the word bidding, it means I am now here to work for you and to do what you say. And step 7 prayer is the actual deal of what most people think step 3 is. But I'm not here to slice apples and oranges. They can be the very same thing. But step 3 is the beginning, and I learned God's will through the next number of steps. And step 7, hopefully, I've changed. And then I go into step 8, principle is brotherly love. Step 12, everything about step 12 is God's will. If I'm practicing the principles in my affairs, I'm following step 10, I'm in God's will. If I'm helping somebody else, I'm in God's will. If I'm helping somebody else through sponsorship, I'm out of the root of the problem, which is me. And having had the spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I should have had a personality change. And I need to keep up the personality change by running and growing through my 10, 11, and 12. And understanding 10 is the keys to the kingdom, to understanding what step 3 actually means, in my humble opinion. That's all I got. Hopefully I answered that. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the step 3 prayer. Holy shit, it's already 9 o'clock. Okay, I'm not going to go through the step 3 prayer. I am going to go through the process of step 10 though. I might go a little bit over time because I was only going to go till 9. But I might go till... Actually, I'm going to go till 10 after 9. And I am going to do the step 3 prayer. And I'm going to dissect the step 3 prayer. And then I'm going to directly correlate it to step 10. So page 63 is where the step 3 prayer is. Okay. I'm going to start actually on the bottom of 62. And then I'm going to read to the bottom of the step 3 prayer. So this is the how and the why of it. First of all, quit playing God. It didn't work, period. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be the director. He is the principal, we are his agents. He is the father, we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone. And what I want to highlight there is the decision and this idea of God is the Father now is a concept. And a concept is only an idea until action is taken. Once action is taken on a concept, then it becomes implemented and it's something more tangible. But the idea is only an idea until the action is taken. Okay? So, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch which we passed to freedom. And the keystone is the keystone at the top of an archway that holds all the bricks in place. So if you stack bricks and then you start stacking them sideways, they're all going to fall. And the middle brick in there holds everything in place. And this is what this keystone, this concept is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch which I passed to freedom. And the freedom is freedom from the bondage of self, because I actually am the cause of all my own problems. When we sincerely took such a position, and when you look up the word sincerely, it means honestly with integrity. So when I sincerely take the position that God is actually running the show, not half-ass. Like, these promises don't actually come from half-ass commitment to God. They come from full commitment to God, or at least 90%, right? When we sincerely take the position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. So here they are. We had a new employer, God being all-powerful. He provided what we needed. So there's a guarantee, first promise. He's going to provide me what I need, but I got to do two things in this deal. I have to keep close to him, and I have to perform his work well. And in my experience, if I stay close to him and I perform his work real well, he will throw you bones. But these bones cannot be forgotten where they came from. They come from God. And once you forget where these bones come from, and if you think they're bones that you've acquired, then it's God or the universe has a funny way of really changing things up. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. more and more we become interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed some peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully. And what I want to highlight here is this facing life successfully. As I take this position and I perform his work and I stay close to him, I become less interested in myself. So there's a benchmark. If I'm not less interested in myself, I'm probably not doing something right, because my experience is exactly what it says here. And I work with a lot of people who learn how to do that, and they become less interested in themselves. The little plans and designs, and I like how it's written, little plans and designs can actually like a piece of sand on the beach. My plans and designs aren't that important in the universal realm. Like, I'm just a little speck. I'm a pitiful little speck. But to me, the egocentric alcoholic, everything's so important to me. But Bill really highlights, it's little plans and designs. It's just I'm a little tiny part of a huge universe. More and more we become interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. There's another benchmark. Have I actually become more interested in seeing what I can contribute to life, or am I still concerned about me? Am I still concerned about myself, my own resentments, my own self-pity, my own self? Or am I actually, looking at what I can do in the world? It's a benchmark. And as I start doing these things differently, I will feel this new power flow in. And I will enjoy peace of mind. As we discovered we could face life successfully. So the version of success in our life today as we work in the material world is everything that deems success is things that come from outside of me. What I have, what you think I am, who's on my arm, what I drive, how much money I have, what my status is at work. That is what we deem success. But when you think about that kind of success, a lot of times when you put your head on the pillow at night, it fucking doesn't stop. Because that's not really success in what Bill's talking about. When you make yourself of service to God and to the fellows about you, and you pack into the stream of life, you perform his work well, you're interested in his other kids, seeing what you can contribute to life. Because the real guidance system of a human being is the heart. When you live from that heart, you begin to lay your head on the pillow at night successfully, knowing that you've done some good in the world, and that actually is what your heart wants you to do. That's what God wants you to do, right? As we become conscious of his presence. And his presence is that deep inner feeling, and it's basically your heart. To me, God is love, and God comes from my heart. When I start clearing the channel through the later steps, I get in touch with the heart, because it's all covered up with shit. Resentments and fear and what society thinks and all these judgments, all these lies that have been told to me that I believe. Self-delusion. I begin to lose my fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We are reborn. We are now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee. So it's just an offering. There's no commitment other than, okay, here's a bit of an offer. I'm gonna try this. To thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. So what that means, when I work with my sponsees, I'm like, if your intent is to really change your life and you really want to do what this prayer says, I say you better be ready for some fucking pain, because build with me and do with me as thou wilt is a serious commitment. Because it's like a renovation. When somebody does a renovation on a house, they go in there with sledgehammers and all sorts of tools, and they gut the house, and all that's left is a structure with 2x4s. But then they rebuild the structure, and they put new fixtures up, and they put new floors in, and everything is built better than it's ever built. So this is build with me and do with me as I will. Tear me apart and put me back together in the image and likeness of you. Build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, because I am the problem, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties. My difficulties are my defects of character. That is the self-will that blocks the entry from God that we read about in the step 3 in the 12 and 12. Take away my difficulties. It doesn't mean take away my problems in my life so I can kind of get free of that shit so I can go work for you. What it means is take away my difficulties, my defects, step 6 type stuff, because that is what actually blocks God from me. Which is why step 6 is such an important step. Because my difficulties are my defense mechanisms, and the way that I've gotten through my life, I'm going to say they're my weapons that I've used to fight life my whole life. And I got to lay down the weapons, I got to surrender, and I put up the white flag. And I ask God to help me. And when you understand step 6, it's about aligning God's help and my willingness to relinquish these things. So take away my difficulties, God, that victory over them. And that's key too. Victory means there's going to be a fight. This isn't going to be easy. The problem with most alcoholics that take this program is through the change, through that fight of trying something new, it's fucking hard. And there's a lot of darkness, and there's a lot of pain. And because alcoholics run from pain and problems as from the plague, through the process of change, most alcoholics go the other way and they do what they've always done. And if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got and you'll be where you've always been. But this is the step 2. Step 6 is where you will grow spiritually. It is the step that made me grow the most in my whole program. But I had to hang in there, and I had to deal with the shit. And that's where my God-centered 12-step pillars really, really helped me. I had to be an open book, and I had to be honest, and I had to tell them everything, because I realized I'm not capable of honesty on my own, and I had to understand that my sponsors and pillars cared more about my life than my feelings. And when they give me shit, or they tell me not to do something, I better fucking listen. But the problem is most alcoholics don't want to listen, because we're very prideful and we want to do what we want to do, and we think we know what's best for us. And it's a tough go, which is why the success rate of staying sober is very low, because of the pain of what we're talking about, the change. And we talk about, there's a line in the book, the pains of drinking before sobriety and inner turmoil before serenity. This is the inner turmoil before serenity. This is where I'm learning to turn my will over. The inner turmoil is fucking hard. But it's not that hard if you submit to changing your life. It's not that hard. So victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And there's the other thing, may I. And when you look up may, all's may is, its definition is a possibility. So again, just to emphasize, step 3 is just the opening. May I do thy will. I'm just offering myself. It's not by no means the commitment to God, but it's the beginning of a commitment. It's the beginning of this stuff. And the whole AA program rests upon how well and earnestly we have come to this decision. So, what is the actual decision? Well, step 7. I am now willing that you have all of me, the good and the bad. Now I now ask that you remove every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go from here to do your work. Tell me what to do, show me what to do. And now I eagerly go out and my pack into the stream of life. That is kind of the real deal here. And where does all this stuff happen? It happens on page 84. And I'll finish with this before the meeting. This thought brings us to step 10. What thought? The thought of amends. Because step 9 is about justice. It's about amends. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue. Listen to how many times the word continue is written in this paragraph. And then there's a word commenced. There's 5 of them in one paragraph. And that means we better fucking get at it and follow this process, because it's really important. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory. We continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered into the world of the Spirit. Very important, world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. And in this next little piece of half a paragraph is the gold. This is the keys to the God's kingdom right here. And I'll read it first, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to number it, because I number it, because I teach sponsees and I want them to understand what the process is. So it's continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately, and we make our amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So if anyone's writing anything down, I'm just going to go through this, and then I'm going to explain it. So it will say it should continue for our lifetime. And I have a little number 1. I have a little number 1 written at continue for our continue to watch. So if you write a little number 1 at continue to watch right next to the C, and then I underline that right to the end of the whole paragraph pretty much. But continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And then I have a number 2 beside when. And then I have, when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. Then I have a number 3 at, we discuss them with someone immediately. So the number 3 is next to we. Discuss them with someone immediately. And then I have a number 4 at, make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. And then I have a number 5 at, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. So now I'll explain that. So essentially, okay, so continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. That's the awareness. If I'm not aware of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, then none of this shit works. So I got to be entirely willing to have God help me in my day-to-day. And this is a spot check inventory that goes all throughout the day. I might have to do this thing 100 times in a day. But I got to be aware, and I got to continue to watch for me, essentially. So I continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. So that's the problem. My thinking, my self-will is the problem, and that's what it is. And then the first step in the solution is the number 2. So I have to follow this mechanics. The first thing I do if I realize I'm thinking in one of those areas, I ask God at once to remove it. Notice I said, we enter into the world of the Spirit, because this is the step where I'm going to God, I'm going to God, I'm going to God, I'm going to God. And I'm always going to God. Because when am I not selfish, dishonesty, resentment, or afraid? I always am. When am I not agitated or fucking resentful or thinking about the future, thinking about the past, or living in morbid reflection? I always am. So I ask God at once to remove it. And then it says we discuss them with someone immediately. And it doesn't say we wait for 2 days or I wait till the end of the week. I discuss it with someone immediately. Because my sponsor can show me the truth. He can tell me the truth and he can redirect me back to God, my source. And in step 4, if you remember step 4, it says it's a fact-finding, fact-facing mission, truth about stock and trade in an effort to discover damaged or unsaleable goods and discard them without regret. That's what happens when I talk to my sponsor. I look at the facts, I face the facts, I look at the truth about my situation, but not always my truth from my own brain, my truth from my sponsor's brain, because he's God-centered and he can see the truth and gives fuck more about me than my feelings. And then I find some damaged or unsaleable good that I can discard without regret. Maybe I'm living in resentment. Maybe I'm living in a fear. Maybe I'm living in judgment. Maybe I'm living in persecution. Maybe I'm living in something that he sees. Maybe I need to make an amend. And then he redirects me to God and tells me this is, what I see. Then I'm like, fuck, okay, that sucks, but okay, thanks. But my willingness, right? And that's my will. This is step 3 stuff right here. And then it says we make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Well, the chances are if I'm following the process up to this point, I'm probably not going to be harming anyone because I'm capping it off before I harm anyone. But if I don't do any of the previous steps, I'm going to act in self-will, and I probably will need to make an amend, right? And then it caps it off with, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. So in my experience, the best part of that last piece is I don't just pray for someone quickly, like maybe it's the person I'm resentful for, maybe it's the person that I'm angry with, maybe it's just people on my list of people I know that need prayer. Doesn't matter who it is, but I resolutely turn my thoughts and I start praying for somebody else. And don't, like my experience is I used to do it just for a quick 5 seconds, and it never really sunk in. Over the years, I've realized I say 20 or 30 second prayers for somebody. Because what happens is when I get into a 20 or 30 second prayer, and I say it out loud, it actually is hitting the deep subconscious in me, and it actually means something, it actually changes me. So I start off with me, the problem, and I end off that 5-step process with being of service to other people. Because my very life as an alcoholic depends on my constant thought of others and how I may help meet their needs. So that's the mechanics of step 10. What it says on the board is took personal inventory and promptly made amends where I was wrong. And then you'll notice in the meetings, everyone's talking about, oh, I made a step 10 and I promptly admitted when I was wrong and I had to make an amend. If you follow the real process of step 10, you get close to God and you don't need to make amends. And it launches you. And this is actually what step 3 does. Every day is where we must bring the vision of God's will into all of our activities. This is what does it. I'm placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. This is what does it. Because I place myself in a position of neutrality within my fellows. And then ultimately I'm in a position of neutrality from the drink and the drug. Because it's all the people in my life around me that's going to cause me alcoholism and it's going to make me drink. But if I'm following this, I'm not fighting anyone and anything. And then what I'll do is I'll finish with this. On the bottom of page 85, much has already been said about receiving strength and inspiration and direction from Him, who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, the book is all about directions. To me, the whole book, everything's mechanical. This isn't a theory. The theoretical part of AA, it takes a long time to get peace and happiness and joy. You follow the mechanics as written, then the results are what the results are. So to me, it's about the mechanics, but the disciplines of the mechanics. So anyway, that's about all I got here today. And if you guys join me next week and you think of any questions, then I'm all down. Thank you for coming, man. Everybody, seriously.